Working Cows Podcast, episode 367. This episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. And this episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature a number of Understanding Ag's regenerative farming and ranching experts on the podcast over the years. In that time, Understanding Ag's reputation for helping producers understand and successfully and profitably apply money-saving regenerative principles and practices has only grown. And there are two primary reasons for that. First, Understanding Ag's consultants are farmers and ranchers who've been there, done that on their own regenerative farms. And second, Understanding Ag's consultants aren't in the business to sell you costly inputs. They get no commissions and you get no pressure. Just profit-building solutions for your operation. Learn more at understandingag.com and discover the hope in healthy soil. That's www.understandingag.com. Very excited to be joined today by Aaron Berger. Once again, Aaron is, of course, the host of the BeefWatch Podcast. But before we jump into that, I do want to let you know after my interview with Aaron, I'm going to play a portion of Bart Carmichael's talk at a recent May calving school. I'll play 5 or 10 minutes of that, and then the rest of it, the hour and a half long portion of that, will be up on Patreon at patreon.com/workingcows for anybody at the bonus content level and above will get access to that. So if you're interested in that and you think the hour and a half of Bart Carmichael talking about his May calving system is worth the $10, you can go there, sign up for 1 month, get access to all the 100+ previous bonus content episodes, download as many of those as you want, listen to them later, and cancel at the end of this month. So always an option. But go ahead and check that out after this, after my discussion here with Aaron about setting heifers up for success. Go ahead and stick around after the interview with Aaron to hear a portion of Bart Carmichael's talk on May calving. But today on the Working Cows Podcast, we're talking to Aaron Berger, and we are talking to him about setting heifers up for success. How do we set replacement heifers up for success within our system? So, Aaron, thanks again for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Thanks for the opportunity, Clay.
You know, I think as is typical here at the Working Cows Podcast, satisfying my own curiosity, scratching where I'm itching, and this grazing season, taking in some replacement heifers, and the bull's going to get turned out here in the middle of June, I suppose, and just kind of wanting to set them up for success, but maybe we should take it back a little farther than that. How are we setting mom up for success and at her breeding and when that calf is in utero and all those things? So maybe let's start there and work our way through that life cycle of that replacement heifer.
All right. That sounds good, Clay. So I think at the outset, I just want to emphasize that reproduction is a complex event, and it's a yes or no event, right? She either got pregnant or she didn't. And so there's a lot of things that go into this. And sometimes we're disappointed in results, and then we look back and try to figure out why. Sometimes that can be clear, sometimes not so much. And so as we talk about this topic, there's not a silver bullet, at least in my experience, there's not. And there's some very good managers that thought they were in good shape and then had an unexpected event occur and were disappointed in the results. So that having been said, I know a lot of your listeners would adhere to a low-cost development type replacement heifer system, looking at finding an optimum level, not a maximum level. And some of your listeners may be just plumb happy with the 50% breed up. Others would be devastated if that occurred. And so I just recognize as we have this conversation, there's a wide range of thoughts around what's a good breed up on heifers. And so we'll have some conversation around that as we walk through this. But anyway, circling back to, what's happening to that heifer even in utero. So some interesting data out of the Goodmanson Sandhills lab where they tracked replacement heifers, and they took that data and went all the way back to the dams of those, looking at whether they were born to first calf heifers or mature cows or older cows. Interestingly, some of the biggest factors that impacted whether or not that heifer got pregnant as a yearling was first, what was the age of her dam? And so typically, if that heifer was born to a cow that was a middle-aged running age cow, say 4 to 7 or 8, she had a greater advantage than if she was from a first calf heifer. And that kind of makes sense a little bit if you think about it, because that first calf heifer is still growing herself, still maturing. And so that heifer calf born to a first calf heifer probably didn't get all the nutrients that potentially its herd mate did from an older mature cow. Second big thing on that was, when was that heifer born in her calving season? So if she was born early in the calving season, she had a greater likelihood of then getting pregnant, going into the herd. The third thing that's been interesting is looking at, of course, this applies to timing of calving. And so the Goodmanson Sandhills lab, they've got both March calving cows and May calving cows, but March calving cows that received some protein supplement during the winter on native range, their heifer calves were more likely to get pregnant as bred or as yearling heifers. And that was only like two pounds of a 30% type cube. So we're not talking an excessive amount. So there's things going on even during gestation that impact that heifer's fertility, some fetal programming. And so, just as we start out, we want to strategically make sure we're meeting cows' nutrient requirements, because that impacts the calf that's in utero as she goes on and delivers that calf and goes into production. So, after that, I guess let me just pause there, Clay. Questions on that, things you want to clarify or hit on there?
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder if maybe the fact that some of those heifer calves born to first calf heifers struggle to get pregnant, is that an argument for a terminal cross on some of those first calf heifers? And maybe that's a problem with calving ease, but is that warranted by the data at all, do you think?
Well, I think, again, this is one of those complex things where you can take a number of different angles. So some folks would say, well, just put those heifers from first calf heifers with the rest. Those that get pregnant, good on them. They get the opportunity to stay. Those that don't, go on down the road as a feeder. And so, again, depends on your environment, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I'm kind of an advocate of, sort out the dinks and the ones that got problems, sort out the real big ones, then treat the rest, challenge them a bit. We don't want to abuse them by any means, but challenge them a bit, and then let those that fit your resources have the opportunity to get pregnant. Those that don't, make a good feeder heifer. So I think for a range-based system, those who are on extensive grazing systems, that kind of heifer development program probably makes the most sense. But I also know that you've got a number of listeners throughout the United States that are in a different environment. And so we want to be careful about applying that kind of a regimen to somebody who may be in Ohio or Indiana or someplace like that. I think some of the principles still apply, but we want to be careful about that. So, I think, should we breed them terminal? There are some people that use something like Wagyu on their first calf heifers. We wouldn't think about Wagyu necessarily being terminal from a growth and performance perspective, but because there's good demand in the market for those Wagyu sired calves, there are some people who do breed all their first calf heifers to Wagyu, and those calves, none are retained as replacements. And so they're in effect a terminal calf, and Wagyu tend to be very easy calving. So for some folks, that's how they approach that.
Very good. So we got this calf on the ground now, and we're going to start figuring out how are we going to treat her, kind of while she's on her mother. What are we doing while this cow's lactating?
Yeah. Again, I think this is one of those situations where your genetic base, your resource base influences how you think about management. So increasingly, I'm seeing folks that are later calving, when I say later calving, April, May, running into June, looking at leaving those heifer calves on the cow for basically an extended period of time, up to 9-10 months. And so basically that heifer calf winters on the teat, so to speak, with the cow. Some of those cows are drying off and kicking those heifer calves off, but they're learning how to graze with mom. They're getting some of that, not a lot of milk, but a little bit of milk, which is high in rumen degradable protein as they go through the winter. And so there's some evidence, some research that would say that could be beneficial in terms of grazing behavior for a heifer to be wintered on the cow like that. So that's one option. The other option is a traditional weaning program where we may be weaning them around 150 to 200 days of age. And then, we're going to grow them through the winter. I think utilizing some protein supplement, again, depending on where you're at with rumen undegradable protein, is especially important for heifer calves that are growing and developing, still putting on muscle tissue, things like that. So that I think is worth recognizing and paying attention to. Again, especially if you're on crop residue or extensive range environments. So one of the things that we think about developing a heifer through the winter is we want her to be growing, but we want her to be not getting too fat. So kind of a target, I think, is somewhere in that 3/4 to 1.25 pound, 1.5 a day gain as we go through the winter. And then as we think about that time moving into breeding, again, depending on when you're calving, if you're calving early, say January, February, you're breeding in April. So you're going to be needing to think about harvested feed and strategically meeting that heifer's needs to do that. If, you're calving late April, May, then we're getting into a, July, August when the bull goes out with the heifer. So the plane of nutrition right prior to and through breeding is pretty important. We don't want to make major changes to the forage or feed they're being fed. So sometimes you'll see people who've got heifers in a dry lot. They're maybe using a concentrate, some corn in that ration. They AI them, and then the next day they kick them out to grass. Well, that's a major diet change. And so sometimes those heifers may be in really good shape, but actually they get kicked out to grass and they go backwards for the first couple of weeks because they're just going through an adjustment to the new feed resource that's there. So that actually can be a negative. So as we think about, rations, we think about whether it's a fed ration or what that heifer's grazing herself, what she's eating. We'd like to see those heifers at least maintaining and hopefully gaining some condition as they move into and through breeding. So the challenge that presents to us a little bit if we're breeding later in the summer, and if we're on Western range like you are, Clay, if we're not breeding till late June, July, August, what happens if it turns hot and dry and forage quality really starts to take a turn? That's where some strategic supplementation may be appropriate. Something like a distiller's cube or something like that, a couple pounds equivalent per day can make a significant difference on these first yearling heifers and first calf heifers in terms of rebreeding. Now, some folks are of the opinion, hey, if she couldn't get bred by herself, I don't need to keep her. And I understand that, but I think you got to walk the line and understand, at times some strategic supplementation can be pretty valuable. And who knows what the fall is going to bring, but the difference between a bred heifer this fall and a open feeder could be a pretty significant price. And so you might want to take that into account as you think about your strategy.
Yeah. And that's kind of, again, that argument for maybe a long breeding season, a short calving period kind of a thing is where you leave that bull out there for a while. Whoever gets pregnant, then you can decide with let the ultrasound machine decide who stays.
Yeah. Or you might also say, hey, if it's kind of dry, we're going to pull bulls early. We're going to put them out for 30 days and then we're going to preg check, and anything that's open, we're going to move down the road more quickly. So there's a number of strategies you can use. I think you just want to think through the reasons and the why as you think about applying those.
Yeah. Yeah. And that strategic supplementation is a paradigm challenging one. I think that a lot of times we think summer, no feeding, no supplementation, and then the winter is a time when we're geared up for that and we're thinking that direction. And so we kind of need that paradigm shift to get us over that hump of saying, well, it's actually really economically, this is going to have a good return on that investment. Whereas maybe locking them in a feedlot and getting them to gain more than that 1.5 pounds a day, could be detrimental, to have them overdeveloped at turnout. So kind of the two sides of that coin that we need to think about, I think, is a good point.
Yeah, I agree, Clay. I think there's been scenarios where heifers were developed to be too heavy prior to breeding and then went to grass and either kind of just barely held themselves together or actually lost weight and had a less than optimal breed up. So, I'm always of the opinion, let's grow them through the winter adequately, but not get them too fleshy. And then let's take advantage of some gain right prior to and through breeding. And usually that's positive in terms of reproductive rates.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the scenario that we find ourselves in is taking these replacement heifers in, and they've been, on hay and maybe some corn or cubes a little bit through the winter, and then they're coming here, and it happens to be a clover year here. So they've got about a month at our house before the bulls get turned out. So they're going to have a few good weeks there to put on some good condition, and that plane of nutrition is really the issue, right? That they're on an inclining plane of nutrition. They're gaining, and things are going well, and that will cause them to cycle harder, from what I understand. Is that borne out by what you've seen?
Yeah, that I think improves or at least maintains cyclicity, and will bring some heifers into heat. The other thing it does is I think it's really important about maternal recognition at the time of implantation. So, I'm just going to make this simple, but if you think about a heifer that's losing weight, she may be cycling and she may actually conceive, but if she's losing weight, basically what's happening hormonally is they're saying, hey, wait a second, we're losing weight. I don't know that we want to take on a pregnancy right now. And so that can result in, not maintaining a pregnancy and having early embryonic loss. So it's as much about not only cyclicity, but also recognition of conception and implantation that occurred early on in the pregnancy.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature some of the world's leading regenerative ag and adaptive grazing experts on our show. And many of those experts are farmer rancher instructors from the nonprofit Soil Health Academy. This year, you'll have several opportunities to experience and profit from attending one of their remarkable on-farm schools and workshops. Whether you're interested in learning more about diversifying corn and bean rotations to increase profitability, merging multiple species and marketing, grazing on the high plains and in northern environments, regenerative farming and ranching, or enhancing profits and production in your beef or dairy operation, the Soil Health Academy has a school for you. One of the best investments you can make is in yourself. So visit soilhealthacademy.org to learn more and register. Financial assistance scholarships are available. Yeah. So any concerns or thoughts as far as through those summer months, how we are managing them? Think about like in a fairly intensive grazing system like ours. Are there some things that you want to keep an eye on in that regard?
Yeah. So one thing I would, beyond just the nutrition, anytime we're hauling or moving cattle very far around the time of breeding, that can have negative effects, especially early on with breeding. So, with your moving daily moves or something like that, that's not that big of a stressful event. And where you're conditioning these heifers prior to the bulls arriving, they're going to know what moving is, and it's going to be a positive event, not a negative. Sometimes people will breed heifers, they'll be in a dry lot, and then 2 weeks later load them on a semi and take them 2 hours and kick them out. That's a stressful event, and that can result in some embryonic loss. So, we kind of think about basically 5 days after breeding till about 45 days after breeding. We want to minimize major stress events in terms of not having an impact on early embryonic loss. I would just say that. So as we think about grazing in the summer, I think you just want to be paying attention to what's coming, what's going in them and what's coming out. So, doing a little observation, paying attention. What's changing? Are we happy with what we're seeing? Are we pushing too hard? Could we push a little bit harder? That's where the eye of the master's got to fatten the ox. You got to just kind of be paying attention to what's going on. Not only watching condition, but I really think watching the quality of the grass and also looking again, what's coming out the back really can give you an indication of where they're at. So, if that starts to change and you start to see quality of the manure changing very drastically, then maybe I need to give more area for grazing, giving them greater opportunity for selectivity, or maybe I need to think strategically about what pastures I'm going to. Early on, if I was on some cool season dominated forage, and then as we get into late June and July, that's hardening off. And especially if it gets hot and dry, that can change fairly quickly. Maybe I'm thinking about, is there some sub-irrigated areas that regrowth this quality is good? Is there some, short grass, things like, buffalo grass, blue grama, where quality is better that I should go to? Those are things to think through.
And what are some of the things you're looking at as far as what's coming out the back end? Are you talking about fiber length or just something where it's not too stacked up? There's not a bunch of rings in it. Is there such a thing as too loose prior to breeding? Some of those things.
Yeah. The too loose thing, if we're on a, perennial grass, we're probably not going to be too loose. Now if we're grazing something like a wheat pasture or something like that, there can be some negative effects there just because we're not always, to be honest, quite sure why, but some really high protein levels can be negative. But most of the time on a perennial pasture that's grass based, that's not an issue. Now, I think one thing to be aware of when you say it's clover year, if they were only on clover, that would be a little cautionary for me because of some of the phytoestrogen levels that can be in a clovers or alfalfas, things like that. If they've got access to plenty of other grass, I don't think that's an issue. But we have seen some negative situations sometimes where real high clover amounts or alfalfa, there's some negative impacts because of the level of phytoestrogens in those when heifers or cows are breeding. So that's one thing to be aware of. But getting back to the manure, if it's consistency of pumpkin pie and it's kind of got a dimple in the middle, that's kind of a good place to be. If it gets to be stacking and ringing, then we're probably getting short on protein, and we may need to think about some strategic supplementation.
We'll go out there with a pie tin, I guess. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, as far as the clover, I don't think they're ever going to be in a paddock with more than 50% of the paddock made up of clover. It's just kind of these strips of better soil in our neighborhood where you get down into the low spots and it's higher clay content, more gumbo type soil, then there's less clover there. But up on some of the silt loams, ridges, there's some clover in some of that, more clover in that. But they hit that on the first day, and then the second day they go to grass, and then the third day they move to another paddock. So that's kind of what we've been watching them do. And so far, I think it's pretty good. But well, think about bull turnout, bull to heifer ratios, some of those things. And I know this is, again, we're in the there's extremes on both ends, right? There's 25, 20, whatever heifers to the bull, and then there's 50 to 60 heifers to the bull, and we'll let the bull find the good ones. So just kind of talk to me a little bit about some of the things you've seen work well.
Yeah, so I think some principles. I think it's always worth the money to get your bulls checked, to especially if you've only got maybe 2 or 3 going out with a group of cows. Now, some folks are running herds where they got 15, 20 bulls. They got a really low bull to cow ratio, maybe they're 1 to 20. Maybe that's not as critically important then. But I am a fan of, get your bulls checked before you go out, just to make sure that there's not something unexpected there. Next thing is, I like to see bulls work. I've had a personal experience where partway through the breeding season, thought everything was good, went out one day and realized, this bull's not able to get this job done. And so, I should be observing, making sure those bulls know what to do and they're getting their work done, and there's not a problem there. As far as bull to cow ratio, again, I think there's a lot of different thoughts here. There's some good data from a number of places that we can go out to 1 to 40, 1 to 50 and not drastically reduce pregnancy rates. Now, having said that, when you do that, you're also running greater risk, right? So if I've got 2 bulls with 50 cows versus 1 bull, I'd be a lot more comfortable with 2 than I would with 1. But, let's say I've got 150 cows, maybe I'm comfortable with 4 or 5 bulls just because I've got more bull power out there. Again, age of bull plays into this as well. Are we talking about yearlings or 2s or 3s? The libido, the sex drive of those bulls, are they aggressive breeders? There's just a lot of factors that go into this. So those are things that pay attention to as you think about bull to cow ratio and what's happening there.
Sure. And then, the length of the breeding season, again, you can challenge them, or you can let them go. And like we talked about earlier, that long breeding season, short calving season, let the ultrasound find the ones that you want to keep that fit your environment and your program. Are those things that you're still seeing work well in your neighborhood?
Yeah, I think so. I think you need to think about, depending on when you're calving, do my late calvers fit very well somewhere else? And do I have a package of those that I can market? So, if I'm a May, June calver, and I've got a handful of the calve in July, those are kind of no man's land, so to speak. Those may be hard to market very well. But if you've got a big package, maybe that's fine. Or, maybe you calve those yourself, intending not to keep those, and then you roll them and sell them as a fall pair to somebody else. So I think just thinking through, what are we going to do with those late calvers? How can we effectively market those? Are we going to capture value from them? That's the thing to think through, I think. So yes, I think a long breeding season, a short calving season can work well. But there are times, and this last fall of 2023, we saw some open feeders were bringing pretty close to, or in some cases even more than, some late bred heifers. And so I guess you just kind of got to pay attention and know what's going on with the market and think about marketing effectively.
Yeah, it does seem that there's almost always somebody calving later than you, but you might have to do a little bit more work to get them marketed well. So yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. So talk about after the breeding season, what are some things that we should be paying attention to after we pulled bulls out? What are some of the things that we need to be watching as far as setting these heifers up for success now that they're getting ready to give birth?
Yeah. So as we think about, especially if we're developing heifers and we're challenging them a bit through the winter, remember that pregnancy is a yes or no event. It's not almost, or, I guess what I mean by that is you need to remember that some of those heifers that got pregnant, even though they're pregnant, we want to make sure that we're continuing to develop them as we move towards that, first calving season. And so that's, I think, paying attention to, are they continuing to gain weight? Not only did they get pregnant, but are we getting them in adequate condition at the time of calving? And so again, depending on when you're calving, I like to see first calf heifers in a body condition score 6. And remember, that last trimester, especially the last 50 days prior to calving, that calf and that first calf heifer is growing really rapidly. And because she's still growing herself, that calf is actually limiting how much she can eat right prior to calving. So we just got to recognize that she needs to be on a quality diet, especially the last 60 days prior to calving, and is going to need to have a more nutrient dense diet than she would if she was a mature cow at the same time. So again, that's where time of calving makes a big difference. If I'm, calving first calf heifers the 20th of May, I may have 6 weeks of green grass, depending on where I'm at prior to that. And naturally what she's got access to is going to do that for me. If I'm calving the 1st of February and I'm on crop residue, I'm going to need to feed a significant amount of harvested feed that's a high quality, nutrient dense feed to be able to meet her needs and the calf's needs right prior to and after calving. So those are some things to think through. I think I'm a fan of challenging heifers through that development phase, but then once they're pregnant, and I think through that second pregnancy diagnosis, let's invest a little bit there. And we already did some selection on challenging them as the a replacement heifer, but now that they got pregnant for once, let's think about strategically getting them and keeping them in the herd.
Right. And that's because those, coming 3-year-old ones that are about to calve for the second time, those coming up open, that's the hardest hit, right? Generally, economically, that's one of the hardest ones to lose.
Yeah, we've spent the money and we got them to that point. Sometimes a little bit strategic money spent, again, can make the difference between a no and a yes on that second pregnancy. And so that's the group to pay attention to and just make sure we're not, I guess, being too chintzy there as we think about getting them into the cow herd.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. What are some other things that you're thinking about as far as just setting heifers up for success? Have we missed something that really needs to be said here?
We haven't talked about genetics very much. I think for commercial cow-calf producers, and again, there's a lot of different thoughts on this, but just think about what are the genetics you're bringing in. And so if we look at trends over time, most breeds on average cows are bigger and they produce more milk. And so that requires more nutrients. So as you think about selection, just pay attention to that. For commercial cows, I'm still a fan of a crossbred cow. And I know there's people who may see that differently, but I've not seen any data yet that would indicate to me that use of a crossbred cow in a commercial environment is still not a significant advantage. And so I think you want to take advantage of that if you can. And there's sure some benefits there as far as heifer pregnancy and growth and development and staying in the herd. I think other things just to pay attention to is thinking about your selection process. Again, I think looking at heifers out of, middle-aged cows are probably, if you got to whittle it down, those are the ones I would look to first. And then, we also think about those older cows. But interestingly, that Gudmundsson data, heifer calves from older cows sometimes actually were a little less likely than cows from the heart of the herd. And that kind of makes sense a little bit too. The cow getting older, her, not as effective with her digestion system, not producing as much milk. And so that may be having an impact there. So, if I had to limit down and pick which heifers have the greatest likelihood of getting pregnant as a yearling, they're going to be heifers that are born early in the calving season out of a middle-aged cow. That's the one that statistically have the greatest advantage.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for agreeing to come back and share a little bit of what you're seeing. So I guess with that, I'll just say, Aaron, thanks for your time today. Appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks, Clay. And I guess for folks that may be looking for some of the resources that back up some of the conversation we had today, there's a lot of good resources at the beef.unl.edu website on heifer development, things that impact pregnancy, strategic supplementation. So if folks are looking for that kind of information, would point them to that resource.
Very good stuff there with Aaron. Appreciate his detailed approach and just the way that he thinks about things and the way that he brings his extension perspective. And by that, I mean well-researched, backed up with data and all those things. And we talked a little bit about that in some bonus content that is also up at patreon.com/workingcows about his podcasting journey and how he's approached it and what he's seen happen over the years. So if you want to check that out, go ahead. And then also the rest of what I'm about to share with you will be up there. So here is a clip from Bart Carmichael, who was hosting a recent May calving tour that District 5, I'm on the board of directors for Farm Bureau in District 5 in South Dakota. And we hosted a May calving tour at Wedge Tent Ranch north of Faith. And Bart started us off with about an hour and a half talking about the how and why they switched to May calving. And here's a portion of that.
Well, welcome to Wedge Tent Ranch. I'm Bart Carmichael. I think I know everybody, or introduced everybody. My wife Shannon over there. And then the fourth generation is Paxton running around here. So when Clay asked me to host this, and I got real, how do we do it and set up, PowerPoint and everything. And it's like, I think just keep it casual. And so if you guys have questions, bring them. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, right off the bat, ranch resources, tradition, and history. And so when I moved here in 93, and I took every ag class there was. In fact, my junior year in high school, I was in ag for four hours a day. And everything was value added, and they promoted that. So the biggest thing we had, he's over here, value added, and don't do everything the way Grandpa did. So this was my grandparents' place, and I actually leased it my junior year in high school because he was ready to sell out. And so I leased it, and then through my senior year of high school, I'd come up here on weekends and get things set up for him. And with that value added in mind, and without not doing the way things Grandpa did, he started calving in the middle of April all the time. And so I moved here, and I was going to show him how it was done. And we come from Nundwood, which is 120 miles south. Warms up 2 weeks earlier, which even then it was still pushing it. But we were turned out the bulls the 1st of June, start calving the 1st of March. Once we had heifers into production, we started them 10 days earlier, so we were at the 20th of February. And we did that for a couple of years and worked our butts off. I mean, and I was pretty proud of the fact that 2 years in a row I only lost one calf, so that tells you how hard I was working. And the only protection on this place is right here. This is the natural protection, this creek right here. The rest of the place is wide open. And so it didn't take me too long to learn that we needed to start getting out of that. And so we just move a little bit back at a time, a little bit back. And we were trying pasture calving all the time, and we were fighting it and I got a picture, and I wrote not calving weather on it. And I put it on my phone for a whole year. And I still didn't change, but we were out in the pasture, and it was cold, and there was a couple scary stories there that one time we were out in the pasture, and then it was muddy, and I don't remember if the pickup was broke down or what, but Kyler, our youngest, had went out in the middle of the night because it was storming, and I had no way to get to him, and he couldn't get back, and all he was doing was warming up calves in the pickup, and then kick them back out and pick up another one, and he stayed out there till morning. And we couldn't get to him, couldn't find him in the dark anyway if we did. And so then we started to get a little bit later, and then the last straw for us, we were calving in April, and starting about that first week of April, and we time breed all of our cows. So being in the purebred deal, we AI every female, and that year, come ultrasound time, we ultrasounded them. We knew we were going to have like 72% of them AI caught, and we nailed it perfect. The storm moved in like the 10th of April. Shannon had to leave. She was taking pictures for a wedding, so she left for the weekend, in which I always said I was glad she left because there was just one big mess to clean up when she got home instead of trying to keep up with Kyler and I, because we just come in and sleep on the couch and keep coming out, and we'd lock the cows up in the lot here, and they hated it. They hadn't been locked up forever. And Dave Pratt had always told me either get in the game or get out of the game. And he said everything between January and May costs you money. And so, people are like, oh, I'm going to move up 10 days or I'm going to move back 10 days. Well, it really doesn't make no difference. And so that year, like I said, it was the 10th of April. We were calving, we started calving, and as soon as we got them cows in, they just went to dropping like crazy. I told Kyler, I said, you check till 10, I'm going to bed, I'll get up at midnight. Well, I overslept, and I woke up at 2:30. And of course, I'm in a panic trying to get my stuff on. And then I realized his stuff isn't in the house. Then I'm thinking, why did he go back out? He knew I was supposed to get up. Then it hit me that he never come in. And from the house to here is not that far, but I couldn't get here fast enough, and it was about 3 foot of snow all the way across the yard there. So you're trying to run in waist deep snow, and then I'm panicked that some cow got him down or something like that, and he's laying out here. And I do get to the barn, And he's in the tack room there, and he's got a calf in the calf warmer. And I said, why didn't you come to bed? And he said, because they won't stop calving. They're just dropping. And in 48 hours, we had like 48 calves born. And we just throw them and put them through these pens and drop them all right here. And we knew we were making bums because, you know, they weren't having time to pair up. They were calving so fast, and we just kept kicking them in here. Didn't know what else to do with them. And it's like 3:30 in the morning. I said, when should we calve? and he says, I don't care. Which instantly I was, just excuse the phrase, but I was pissed. I go, you got cows here. I said, you better care when we calve. He said, Dad, I signed a rodeo scholarship. I'm gone next year. And it's like, I'm not doing this by myself. I don't have the energy. I don't even want to. And so that was the year we just decided it was May or nothing. And so we AI'd the cows the 31st of July that year. Last year was the 1st of August. The AI crew comes and teases us because they're already preg checking heifers before they AI our cows. But so you think about your resources of your ranch, and like our resource, we didn't have the resources. I moved here in '93, and we built this barn immediately for calving because we knew we were the next year. But the ranch doesn't have the natural resources to calve that early. It doesn't have the feed base. It doesn't have the protection. So why were we trying to push something that wasn't going to work? And it was costing us money. And we just kept pushing back. And then since the May deal, it's just made life a lot easier. We're not in a stress. We're not, calves are born on grass. They're born out. Everything's fine. Ryan showed up. He likes to tease me because he's calving my 2-year-old heifers. So, but relatively, that really takes the pressure off me. But it really doesn't change the fact that calving in May versus calving in March or something, where you're having to deal with that cold weather, deal with trying to get other chores done. And so you can get out there and check, tag, whatever, not tag. I got plenty of friends that don't tag at all, just let them calve. We had started when the kids were young, and I know a lot of people worry about May calving as far as trying to keep them pairs up, How do you deal with all them pairs and moving the cow herd on a system? And we did it, used to too. We'd calve in a spot and we'd kick pairs out. Well, all the kids were like 8, 9 years old, riding ponies, trying to move pairs. And it's all up to the cow. If she don't want to take that calf, you ain't going to get her to. And as soon as you let her go, she'll go the other direction as fast as she can. And the kids hated it. And so we adapted the sandhills method. So we just ride through and pick up the heavies and move them to the next bunch. Then they're calving on clean grass. And the kids, even at 8, 9 years old, could do that. If there was a pair there, they'd just leave them behind. And every once in a while, we'd have to kick a cow back. It wasn't a big deal. So that's how we adapted that strategy, and I've carried it through now to keep doing it that way. And then as we do that, then we'll catch the pairs up with the main herd, and get them all in one bunch. But we're not dealing with calves all the time, trying to push them. So when we do go from that first one, the first one's always the hardest because you'll get a early calf or two, and they get to be 10 days old or something before you get enough calves to lead back, because he'll move with them. And so you have to do a little sorting there. Once we get to rolling, though, we'll calve in a spot and maybe get 30 or 40 calves, which could be a day, it could be 5 days. And then we move the heavies away. Then when we get 2 of those pair bunches, then we move the first pairs into the second pairs. And when we do that, we're doing it all with one electric wire. And as soon as we move them, we just taught them 30 or 40 how to move. So we're not dealing with 120 or 100 calves all at once. We're dealing with 30. And then when we pick that next bunch up, the first 30 know how, and we teach the next 30 how to do it. And they move with their mother that way. And we've worked with Tom Knopfsinger a lot on cattle handling, which also calving. So now if we see a calf or a cow without her calf, she gets chased to her calf, and we want them to pair up, and it's really starting to make a difference. First couple of years I kind of wondered, but now them cows, they see us, they get to their calf and they pick them right up. And we want them to act more like horses, keep that calf right next to them. Clay?
Yeah, you said you chase the cow to the calf. Is that almost like a pressure and release thing where
Yep.
This is uncomfortable because I'm not with my calf. When I get there, it gets comfortable?
Yep. Yeah, we don't, as soon as she even gets close to her calf, we back off, and we just want her to stay there. Had a 3-year-old the other day that, I don't know what her deal was, but she'd run right by it and keep going, and I'd go around her and push her back, and she'll get sold. She just won't stay here. But so we work on that a lot, but it's, just get them over there next to them. We want them to find them and pick them up. We want them to at least be standing there if we're coming by.
Really enjoyed the opportunity to be boots on the ground once again at Wedge Tent Ranch and see what they've got going on, and to just see the way that the landscape has continued to shape the genetics there is always a lot of fun. So my son and I were sitting next to each other on the trailer ride back from the pasture tour, and just looking at all those cows that really fit that Bonsma type. So it was kind of fun to see. So very good stuff there. I really appreciate Bart and Shannon welcoming us onto their place. And as I said, if you want to check out the rest of that talk, it's up at patreon.com/workingcows. Next week on the podcast, I'm going to be, got a few different directions we might be going. Might be talking to Rusty Williamson about being a visionary leader. Might be talking to Ellen Bench about all natural livestock health. So not really sure which direction we are going next week on the podcast, but we will have something for you again real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.